Stand up for yourself, and I'll back you up. These problems don't solve themselves. I'll tell you what, instead of would or could, I think you should draw a line in the sand and stand your ground. It's for your own good.
When I got up this morning and headed out for the studio, it was 10 degrees. So it brought me back to the time when I was younger and played ice hockey on an outdoor hockey rink. Played a lot of hockey, high school, college, and greatly enjoyed it, but had a lot of triggers this morning and all the great memories that were included in getting down to the ice and getting laced up and just the sounds of the pucks. And I know that sounds silly, but triggers happen for a reason. And some are positive and some are troubling and disruptive. Hi, my name is Roy Poyan, and I'm the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids, and I'd like to welcome you to our next episode of The Voice of Families and Addiction. Today we're going to review the topic of managing your triggers. It comes from Managing Your Triggers Toolkit, a practice for being resilient in challenging circumstances, because that's typically when we're bothered by triggers, is it's creating a challenge for us. And this was produced by two people. They are Robert Gass and Judith Anacera. And what I'd like to do is ask you to go to our website, familiesimpactedbyopioids.com, and at that moment you can take time to go to the page that says triggers, go to the PDF that says Managing Your Triggers Toolkit, download that, and then turn around and print it and put it in front of you. So either you're listening to this on our podcast, and welcome, or you're viewing this on our video, in which case I'll say hi. But with that in mind, we'll move forward now and take a look at, so what's this whole, why would we take time to understand triggers? Well, for the primary reason, they can be extremely disruptive, or they can be a signal in a good way, if we look at it from that perspective, that this is something that bothers us. And, with a counselor or a mental health coach, you might want to take a look at, well, why does that cause me such distress? And how can I manage it in such a way that through therapy sessions, I can cognitively reposition this in a place in my thought life that makes more sense for me going forward. So until that's done, you still got to live with the triggers. And if you're viewing this, and if you're in front of the holidays or any holiday or any event that you think might include a trigger, then this is time well spent. So let's get started with the document in front of you. And we're on the first page, and we're looking at how it works. And it just gives you the 7 different areas that we're going to go over in today's discussion. The most important aspect is that we start out from understanding. So where do triggers, come from? I mean, why do they exist, and what generates them? Basically, in our brain, okay, and we are going to talk neurologically for just a minute. Try not to get too science on you, but we remember that the amygdala is a portion of the brain. I'm sorry, I mispronounced it. It's the amygdala. And what that's doing for us is, in our brain, it remembers different types of things that have happened to us and attaches that emotion to a fight or flight trigger. And I'm sure we're all familiar with fight or flight. What fight or flight does when we're triggered in that way, it sends out a signal that we're in great distress, and we're not going to take time to cognitively reason this in our neocortex, the front part of your brain, where executive functions are done, like reasoning and logic. It overrides that for the purpose of survival. You want it to do that. That means your brain is functioning correctly. It's a good thing. Fight or flight keeps us alive. But it can also be very disruptive when it's something that might be more, less threatening, like my father is talking to me, but no, he's not really talking to me. I'm listening to somebody else talk like my father used to talk to me. And now I'm addressing it as though my father were talking to me. And so it's displaced anxieties now because all this person is talking to me. And let's say they're giving me instruction. And I'm sitting there thinking, without really giving it much reason and logic, this sounds like my father criticizing me. And that's not what this person is doing. But our emotional status says that's absolutely what's happening. And because you're not using logic and reasoning and judgment, and you're not taking the time for that, then we are now in a position of, I need to get out of this situation. I'm very uncomfortable. This person may be looking at you thinking, Jerry, I'm just giving you instructions on how to work the copier machine. It could be as simple as that, but our response is not oriented to the actual activity that's taking place in the present. So that being explained, we're starting to take a look at, what is the phenomenon of a trigger? And what we need to understand is that we need to train ourselves. We're responsible for how we respond to things in our environment and the people. And in order to do that, we need to have a way of stepping back at the moment of being triggered, which means we need to be aware that we're being triggered. Not that somebody's doing this purposefully, but this is what our mind is doing. And we need to be able to take ourselves out of that space, real time, while it's happening, in order to kind of regroup our thought life, in order to then be able to say, no, this is a trigger, and I know this. Well, that's the purpose of us talking about this today. So what can we do that helps us in the way that we need to not respond to the trigger as we might typically do, given that the trigger is in front of us? So the question is, so is it possible that we can manage this, or do we just have to kind of live with it and put up with it and ride it out when it happens? Well, fortunately, the answer is no, you don't. You don't have to put up with triggers anymore. And we're going to show you and give you skills, but that means it's on you to be able to take time to say, okay, I'm going to do these practical exercises with this video that we're watching, but in the future, I won't have the video, of course, but I'll remember that these are the steps that I need to take in order to properly address triggers. And I think this is very exciting. I think that we can now, really take charge of our environment, because triggers are typically things that trip us up. If you're a person that's trying to maintain sobriety or abstinence from drug use and substances, then you know the word trigger. I mean, when you went to your IOP or your residential program through recovery treatment program, they talk to you a lot about managing your triggers. And it may be that you're 3 years out of that environment and haven't paid much attention to triggers in a little while. I want to invite you, don't let your guard down. When it comes to triggers, they will be a major source of a relapse, a major source. So let's regroup ourselves, and it could be eating disorder, it could be narcissism, it could be schizophrenia, mental health, chronic mental health conditions, personality disorders. And once again, triggers can be positive too. So, there's a balance there. But we're going to talk about the ones that are troubling us and creating us distress today. So I'm on page 1, and in the page that you're looking at, it says assignment number 1, list my triggers. Well, that's a great idea. Okay, so we're not in the environment where we're getting triggered, but we have the advantage of saying, listen, I'm going to a Christmas party, and I know that there's going to be a lot of people, and God bless them, they're enjoying themselves, and they will probably be drinking, several drinks during the evening while they're talking to me, and there's always Uncle Bob, who seems to try and always pull me to the side because he wants, he was one of the sources for cocaine, and in this scenario, I don't want to do it, and I know that Uncle Bob's going to say I should do it. Guess what? That's a trigger. you know that this is likely to happen, if it's even remotely likely to happen, then put that down. Put down other triggers, like when people tell me what to do and it's not something that I want to do, I often get anxious. I feel it in my gut. And then I start to like withdraw. And they can see that I'm withdrawing, and I can see that they can see it, which makes me feel embarrassed that I'm responding this way, but I can't control myself. I just don't like to be told what to do. Well, as it turns out, when I was younger, my mother didn't just tell me what to do, she got violent about it in this scenario. And so with that in mind, I'm now attaching that emotion to this very, oblique conversation of, hey, make sure that you do this, and you don't want to do it that way because then this will happen. And you're thinking, oh my God, that's exactly how this happened when I was a child. They must think I'm a child. And if that's the case, then they must not think well of me, which means I'm not being very well accepted. Do you see how those things trailed? We're going to not just list triggers, we're going to actually map the triggers so that you can start to go deeper into each trigger. There's going to be a real advantage in doing this. And this is part of the exercise that is listed on the next page, which is page 2. So first, let's write down what are some common triggers. Okay, now, how are we going to use this? Like I said, you're going to go to a party and you're a week out. Hey, be your best friend. Be kind to yourself. Write down the triggers of each person that you think you're going to see at this party, and write down exactly what might trigger you that they might do. You don't have to get into therapy with yourself and, the source of that trigger is this, and it's from my grandparents, it's from my teacher, it's from a hockey coach, whatever, it is there. And I know, excuse me, that in the past, this particular person who will be at the party typically says these kind of things to me. So with that in mind, I'm going to decide ahead of time what this means to me and how I'm going to handle it. But for right now, in this exercise, I want you to take the time. If you have to stop the video or stop the playing of this podcast, do that, because this document should be printed in front of you. And with that in mind, you're now going to list out what the triggers are. So when we're starting to take a look at assignment number 2, we're on page 3, by the way, we're going to start to map my triggers. Well, this is kind of cool because, and pardon, the authors put in a word that I don't like to see in print, but at the top of the page. But in the sense, they're driving home the point that, a lot of triggers get kind of vile and very troubling in the words that are used. So sometimes we use those same words against ourselves and our thought life. Oh, I'm messed up, but they use a different word. So then you sit there and you say, well, if I'm messed up, and I'm in the middle of the page of page 3, it says, here's a typical example of mapping out the trigger. This is very helpful. You would really benefit by making this a standard way of how you treat yourself and how you treat your thought life regarding triggers. So the trigger then presents itself, and the initial feeling is, I feel defensive. What we're going to ask you to do is to sit there and say, so what hormones in our bodies, I feel sick, I feel edgy, my head's starting to shake a little, I'm kind of thinking like I'd like to get up and get out of here. And now you're going down and down to the next level. If she's right that I'm not good at what I do, well, now you're doubting your confidence. Go down to the 4th floor. You see how you're going further down, and how this trigger had started this cascading downward spiral. And now, if I'm not good at what I do, then I'm not worthy. And we're perfectly capable. You see it on paper, you think, oh, I don't think that way. Trust me, everybody thinks this way. So this is not uncommon, is what I'm trying to say. So now you're down to the 5th floor and you're saying, I'm not worthy, then I'm not lovable. Well, you might not hear yourself saying that, but for some reason, you just got a little bit of a feeling in your system. Maybe your heart's saddened a little, And you're starting to think, well, not lovable. Well, okay. Well, that this all stemmed from someone tells me I didn't do something right at work. Oh my gosh. Well, this has happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. So for that reason, if I were going into an environment where somebody might, be inclined to say such a thing like that to me, which could happen at a party, then, I want to understand it so that when I see it, I can call it what it is because I've already mapped it out. I've mapped out how I feel anxious and some of the cognitive thoughts that I give myself regarding to someone said I did something wrong, okay? And now I'm looking at the event, and now I'm in assignment 2 on page 4, if you'd follow along with me, and I'm starting to come into my map. So on page 5, you're actually going to draw yourself a map for each of your triggers, and you might think, hey, Roy, this is a lot of work. And I'm saying back to you, I hope you think you're worth it, because if that's where you are, then we need to start to talk about confidence and self-confidence, because you are worth it. You're absolutely worth it. You absolutely do not have to put up with triggers in the way that you respond to triggers. Now, can you control them when they say something that's a trigger? No, nor should you even try. You cannot control other people. You can control how you receive these types of messages and what you process and what the process you use does to you. Because if you just noticed, you have one process where you let it run free, you have another process where you've already pre-identified what it is, and you've mapped out where it takes you emotionally. So now we're going to look at managing your triggers number 3. And we're on page 1 at the top of the banner of the page, you'll see what to do when triggered. Well, when our hunt buttons are pushed, the major problem is that, we can't do damage control on what we've said and how we've said it, because we've said it and it's been done. That's why we're taking the time now to build a coping skill. I want to give to you from this document the premier way to handle this. We're going to name your trigger. We're going to name it, and we're going to give it a space that's appropriate, and we're going to shift our state of mind so that we can deal with the situation as it is by using our frontal cortex and not the amygdala. Because if we use that, then we're going to be in a fight or flight, and we're going to say something that we would wish later on that we didn't say, and that's going to create problems for us and an embarrassment. So we're strengthening your coping skills. Well, is that what this is all about? Absolutely. Yes, we are strengthening your coping skills. And how are we doing that? Well, we just did 2 exercises, okay? And that basically brought us up to here where we're saying we're going to name it. This is the 3rd. We're going to take the space that's appropriate and put it there, and we're going to shift our state of mind, and we're going to deal with it cognitively by giving ourselves time to respond to it. So now let's look at page 2. Okay, now I want to remind you that we're in managing your triggers number 3. So we're on page 2, and we're looking at name it, step 1 at the top of the page. I hope you're with me. And we're going to go through and we're going to name what it is so that when we see it, we can sit there and say, hockey coach, mom, when she was mad, teacher, when she was criticizing my ability to read. And we know what the drill down, what the down escalate is for each of these. Wow. Now you're really like taking continence in yourself. You're in control of what's happening. So now you're going to give it an appropriate space. Well, what do we mean when we're saying that? We're saying that we don't act on it. We're going to sit there, we're going to say, that's that trigger, and I'm not going to act on it. You cognitively tell yourself that in your mind. and you're still looking at this person in the face, and they're still reading your body language and how you respond, but you just quickly, boom, 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 said, that's this, and I know where we're going. So basically what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to give it an appropriate place, and I'm going to deal with it. And by dealing with it, you've shifted your state. And now you're kind of removing yourself from the triggered environment, either emotionally or physically. And we give you some examples here of how to do that. You might sit there and say, that's an interesting point. Let me take a little time to think about that, and I'd like to respond to it in just a minute. In other words, I'm going to take time because you've said something that was obviously important for you to say to me, but I'm respecting what you said by giving it my true commitment of self-thought, and I want to make sure that I give you the best response that I can. There's nothing wrong in that. So shifting the practice of shifting space is name it, take space that's appropriate, shift your state, and then respond to the situation. Now, I didn't go through all of the different paragraphs that were in these past 6 pages in this section number 3. I expect that you will, and you'll start to better understand what it is that I briefly explained to you here. So now we're at trigger number 4, and how to know you're triggered. You know, you need to be aware that, wow, I'm in a state of trigger in this, if there is such a word. It's a Royism. I create my own vocabulary. So with that in mind, we're looking at the fact that, you know, you are in a trigger situation and you know it. And so this is when you apply the 4 practice steps, okay? It's the 4 steps practice of state shifting. Name it, take space appropriately, shift your state, and deal with it. We're on page 1 of Manage Your Triggers number 4. And so if you follow along with me, shifting off to the next page, we give you a good 7 ways to set up the fact that you now know that you're being triggered. You're defensive. You're obsessively repeating the same thought. You're emotionally outburst, sudden intensive engagement in addictive type behaviors. So you're kind of like, wait a second. I've been triggered, and I need to understand it. I need to name it, and I need to take the appropriate space, and I need to shift my state, and I need to deal with this situation. So the art of doing this, and I'm now on Managing Your Triggers number 5, the art of doing this is we actually provide you, well, the author provides you with, looks like 12 different tools. And with that in mind, you're going to go and take a look at these 12 tools and determine for yourself, you know, which one, actually, sorry, there's 13. Which one of these 13 tools, you know, can I use that's going to be best for the situation? So we've given you a way of managing yourself. Let's do a regroup. We're looking at the fact that we know what triggers are. We've actually identified what our triggers are. We've mapped how we handle and do spiral downward movement emotionally with our thought life on each of these triggers. We've mapped them, okay? You see how you're really taking control of this now. And now you've moved over to, so what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to shift our state, okay? And we're going to use the 4 practices of, we're going to name that trigger, we're going to take the appropriate space, and we're going to shift our state. We're going to do something about it by maybe calming ourselves down by using one of those tools, and then we're going to deal with the situation. Well, part of that is breathing. Part of that is moving around, gives you energy to rethink. Part of that is feel your feelings. Let yourself identify that you're feeling your pulse rate went up or you're feeling anxious. Self-soothing, so mindfulness practice, meditation, and prayer. These are, you know, some of the 13 that I just mentioned are the tools on how you can handle and manage the fact that I've identified that you are in a triggered environment right now, and you need to be able to properly mesh them. And now we're in Managing Your Triggers number 6, meshing. So the question is meshing. Well, what is meshing? Well, It's interesting. In India, they talk about this. It's kind of I don't know if it's a Buddhist thing or what, but think of yourself as being a screen, like a screen door in the summer, and you have those little squares and there's holes, and this whole like trigger thing comes at you, but you've got these holes, and you're not a solid door. If you're a solid door, this trigger comes to you, and it hits you, and it splatters all over the door, and you're holding onto it, and it's dripping down on you, and now it really is a part of you. That's not right. Don't do that to yourself. So instead, take a look at meshing as a way to handle the situation. Okay? So with that in mind, don't hold on to it. Don't try and force the trigger out of your thought life. Okay? Let it be. Let it come right through you and get to the other side, and now it's going past you, but before it was in front of you, you saw it, you named it, you understood it, it comes through you, and now it's behind you. And that's the visual on what you're doing when you're doing these exercises. But if you keep holding on to it and giving it life and then rebirthing that life later in the night, then, that's not going to be good for you. And it could fold into more of like a repetitive trauma environment. And trauma is often related to triggers. So if something happened to you in the past and you have a trigger that triggers a trauma event, then you're likely going to relive the trauma. And that sets up a whole other set of skills. So if you do have trauma in your life, you do need to seek counseling for that. And they will show you cognitive behaviorally how you can make changes in that. So with that in mind, what do you do when others get triggered and they're in your environment? Well, on number 7, and I'm on page 1 for number 7, that's being addressed. And you recognize when others are triggered and you're thinking, wow, he didn't respond to that very well. That must have triggered something in his past. So you're seeing an emotional outburst, an expression of judgment that's like really severe, personal attacks and blame, and a lot of nonverbal things. Well, what's being suggested by the authors is don't try to work things out when you're also triggered. If you're triggered and they're triggered, that's not the time to start figuring things out. You use the shifting of state and take care of yourself first. Don't try and reason with somebody who's triggered. That's not the right time. Don't accuse someone who's being triggered. Oh, you're just this and you're just that. Not the right time. Let them get through the trigger first, and don't ignore them or be dismissive. It never happens. You're not thinking right, and you walk away. And boy, that physical separation when somebody's triggered, that's not healthy for them. They're not going to get through that trigger very well. We're assuming you care that they're triggered, that you would consider, what can I do? It's obvious to me that they're triggered. So this takes us through the different types of things that you can do on page 3 of trigger session number 7. I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I hope that you found this to be of value to you. Triggers are real. Triggers can be managed. We just showed you how. We provided you with a document on how to do that. There's some great YouTubes out there, and I would strongly encourage that you use this as the beginning of as all of our materials here at the Voice of Families and Addiction. We're maybe a starting point for a topic area that we want you to further educate and develop yourself in so that you can be more in line with who you really are and who you want to be. Thank you very much for joining us today for this episode of the Voice of Families and Addiction and Managing Your Triggers.